That the camera probably didn't pick up the first part of that, but hopefully that'll take. And then I'm going to throw this one back there. So hopefully the camera picked up at least some of that. Here, I'm just going to hand it to you because I'm afraid it's going to be like, so yeah, whatever, whoever. And we can just kind of pass that around. Okay, so hopefully the camera is actually using this microphone and will now pick me up. So Apologetics 202, again, it's on YouTube, and all of the videos now are actually up there. So all the classes we've done so far are actually up there. So we're now caught up. So the titles will tell you which class. So even though they may have been uploaded at different times, it'll say 1, 2, 3, and 4. So this is class number 5. Today we are going to talk about Daniel chapter 11. Now we've been in Daniel quite a bit. But guess what? This is pretty cool. This is the most prophetic chapter in the entire Bible. Okay? So there are 135 prophecies, and that's supposed to say 35 verses, not 41 verses. So I apologize. It was kind of late last night, so I guess I didn't check that. But it's over 490 years worth of prophecy. So we're going to go through 135 prophecies, and this is going to be from Daniel 1 to Daniel 11. Verse 1 through verse 35. We're actually not going to go into all the way to the end because there's future prophecy. And as we've mentioned in previous classes, we're mostly interested in fulfilled prophecy right now. So 490 years of prophecy. And then the 36, starting at verse 36 into the end of the chapter is actually future prophecy. So there's actually more prophecies than 135, but we're just talking about the 135 that have actually been fulfilled. So this is a crazy, crazy chapter. So we have to dig in because we got a lot to cover. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a verse up there. And then if you guys would mind either reading it from your Bible or reading it from here. And if you do so, just grab the mic there. And then we'll read it. And then we'll talk about how it was a prophecy and how it got fulfilled. So does anybody want to just start with Daniel 11 verses 1 and 2?
From my Bible?
Sure. You can do it from yours or from the screen, either one.
Also, I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and to strengthen him. And now will I shew thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of the Grecia.
No. So here we go. We've got several different things. So the first is that it's in the first year of Darius the Mede, which is also, as we would know, during Cyrus, right? As we talked about in one of the previous classes, this is really when the Persians take over Babylon, right? So this is when Belshazzar loses Babylon to Cyrus the Great, and then we think Darius the Mede, who we've already talked about, was one of several different people. But so it tells us when it was written, and then also it says. So we've got Cyrus, right? And then behold, there are going to be 3 more kings and then a 4th king who's going to be richer than them all and stir up people against the kingdom of Greece. So let's talk about this, okay? So the first year of Darius the Mede, this is 547 to 546 BC, right? So he technically started to reign in about 547. So it kind of depends on whether you say, well, it's right when he started or it was his first full year. So we're talking about 547 to 546. Remember, we count down in BC when this was written. Okay, so keep that in mind as we start to go through this. If it's easier, we can round it to 550, just for numbers' sakes, right? But this is a more accurate number, but that's important. So 3 more kings and a 4th. So this is after Cyrus. So guess what? The next one after Cyrus was Cambyses, son of Cyrus. So this is 530 to 522. Then a guy named Pseudo-Smyrtus, as opposed to the full-blown Smyrtus. He's shaking his head. It was a good one. Okay, all right.
Dry.
It was dry, but it was good, right? Like, I'm a dry guy. So, for 2 years, actually. So anyway, this guy, he reigns for a very, very short time. In fact, roughly half a year before he gets killed. But anyway, Darius the First is after that. And then we get Xerxes. Now, you remember it said 3, and then the 4th will be the richest. Well, Xerxes was clearly the richest. And then it says, right, he's going to go against the Greeks. Well, he was very wealthy. In fact, we find Xerxes is being talked about as Ahasuerus, that's his other name, in Esther, right? So if you've read the book of Esther, this is the same Xerxes that we're talking about, okay? And he does go in to fight the Greeks, but he gets turned back, right? But he actually creates the largest army until that time. Has anyone seen the movie 300?
Yeah.
This is that guy. This is who we're talking about. Okay, so to put that in context, this is Xerxes, that god king, right? From the movie 300 with the crazy, immortals and all that. That's the person we're talking about, right? So he goes and he takes Greece. Do you remember what's the movie of 300 is actually about? Athens and Sparta, right? Greece, right? And so that's a very, very famous battle where the 300 Spartans. Now, more historically accurate, there was not just 300 Spartans. There was actually quite a bit more.
That was just the past.
That was just,
really push
yeah.
it off the cliff and say,
No. The movie is obviously, dramatic and sensationalized, but the actual battle actually becomes known. It's a saying that, like, we don't use it much anymore, but basically it means, like, when you just sacrifice so many people to get a very small objective, right? So in educational circles, we'll still use that phrase, but we don't really use it much anymore, right? It was 300 Spartans, true, but there were actually other people with them. So in the movie, it just had the 300 Spartans, right? And then it had a few others, but they were supposed to guard the pass, right? Well, no, in this case, there was actually 300 Spartans. We think there was probably more, but then there were also other people in that path. But the idea is that this small number of people were able to hold them back. Now, what you don't know is that as later that movie, right, it talks about they're still fighting, right? Because they die, right? Well, Xerxes actually takes Athens, right? And so he actually does stir up Greece, right? So exactly as we would see. So on to the next one. So we're just going to keep kind of going in order. We're going to be talking about a lot of things that are happening and then boom, 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 boom. All right. So we're just going to go real fast. Can somebody read verses 3 and 4 for me? Do you want to just grab it? And we can just sort of pass it back and then you can either read it from there or from your Bible.
Then a mighty king shall arise,
You can put it like way down here because it'll be like super.
Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do as he wills. And as soon as he is arisen, his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the four winds of heaven. But not his posterity, nor according to the authority with which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others besides these.
Okay. So we're talking about a mighty king, right? And then a mighty king shall arise. This is Alexander the Great. Okay. This is, as you might remember from the previous ones, right? It's the ram, it's the goat with the one horn, right? It's that same thing. So Daniel talks about these guys a lot. So then a mighty king shall arise. This is Alexander the Great. And as soon as he is risen, so at the height of his power, he actually dies, right? He's only alive for about 13 years. And we've mentioned this before. We think he died of malaria. And it's not to his posterity. Well, that just means it didn't go to his kids. That's what posterity means, right? Your children. Well, it doesn't go. His kingdom doesn't go to his kids. This is exactly what happens. In fact, it goes to the four generals, right? And we'll talk about those. I'll list them here in just a second.
he only lived 13 years.
Yeah, he conquered the entire known world in about 12 to 13 years.
So he was 13?
Sorry, he didn't. No, sorry. He only lived 13 years once he became king.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, so he was about...
he only reigned king.
No. So he died when he was about 32, 33. Okay. So he became king about 2021, conquered the entire known world as a relatively young person. I mean, even back then, that was not considered old, right? So he then conquers the entire known world and then dies 13 years into his reign of what we, again, think is malaria. And so it's at the height of his power, he dies, okay? What's that? Yeah, I mean, it's pretty evident that he died of some disease. Like, there's historical records of that. So, but it doesn't go to his children. A lot of his children actually get killed. And so then on his deathbed, as I mentioned before, they say, who's it going to go to? And he says, the strong, right? And so this causes a fight, and you get these four generals not to his authority, and it's split. And then it says, right, it says split into four winds. So So when the Bible talks about four winds, it's really generally talking about directions, right? So we have north, south, east, west, right? So in this case, we're going to split into four. So we're dealing with Seleucus over Syria and Mesopotamia. And you guys may remember the map that I had, the orange and the purple and all that. I'm not going to bring it up today because we just don't have time. But then we have Ptolemy over Egypt, Lysimachus over Thrace and Asia Minor. So this is the Turkey area, right? Greece a little bit. And then you have Cassander over Macedonia and Greece, right? So if you kind of look at it, you've kind of got east, west, north, south, right? And so what we're dealing with here, the ones that we're mostly interested in are the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. In fact, pretty much the rest of this chapter will be dealing with these two. Anyone, any idea why we would pick these two, or why Daniel's vision only really has to do with these two? Do you guys remember the map at all? Look at the places that they took over.
They're close to Israel.
Exactly right. So you have Syria, right? Egypt, actually, the Ptolemaic Empire actually had most of Israel, right? Until they kind of fight back and forth. And they're fighting back and forth. And so that's why we're concerned with these two. The other two also don't even last that long. They fall pretty quickly. So, but the ones that we're interested in are the Seleucids and the Ptolemaic Empire. All right. So these guys are going to go back and forth a lot. So as we continue on here, we get even more, right? So this is basically the story of what's going to happen. And again, remember, roughly 550, he writes this stuff, okay? So let's go on to Daniel chapter 11, verse 5. Can somebody read that?
The king of the south will become strong, but one of his commanders will become even dumb with great power.
You're right. So basically, one of his princes shall be stronger, and he shall rule, and his authority shall be a great authority, is another way to say that. This is the ESV. Which version do you have? Do you know? NIV, maybe?
I have no idea.
No worries. Okay, no problem. So Daniel chapter 11, verse 5. Here we go. So then the king of the south, so this is Egypt, will be strong. So this is Ptolemy the first, right? So this is the guy that takes over Egypt from the generals of Alexander the Great. What time is he reigning? 323 to 285. So we're already almost 200 years later, guys. This is amazing. So, but one of his princes will be stronger. Guess what? The guy that runs the Northern Empire, which is we're going to refer to, this is the Seleucid Empire. That's always referred to as the North, the king of the North, okay? And then Ptolemaic Empire is always referred to as the kings of the South, okay? So if you see that, but guess what? So the guy that actually takes over the Seleucid Empire is a guy that serves under Ptolemy. One of his princes. He's literally one of his commanders, as your translation says, right? It uses the word commander instead of prince. They're interchangeable. So this guy, Seleucid the First, serves under Ptolemy, and then he rebels and takes over the entire Syria area, and that becomes the Seleucid Empire. One of his princes will be strong. The details are just, they're juicy, man. I just love them. So here we go. Daniel 11, and it's verse 6. Can somebody read that? You can either read it from there or there if you can't read it.
After some years, they shall make an
Alliance.
and the daughters of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the strength of her arm. And his arm shall not endure, but shall be given up, and her attendants, he who fathered her, and he
supported.
who
Sorry, that A there. I should have removed that. It's a reference.
supported her in those times.
All right. So this is a lot. So let's break it down and see what is this talking about. So, apparently, well, all right. Well, that didn't quite work, but we'll just go from top to bottom. So they will make an alliance after some years. This is approximately 40 years, right? So we just talked about how we have the first king of the south and the first king of the north. 40 years later, we're on to the next kings, right? Because we just talked about a power shift and how they basically fought and get those two kingdoms. Now, 40 years later, we're dealing with new kings. So we have Ptolemy II. So guys, I'm sorry, this is going to be confusing, but this is how this works. You basically have Ptolemy with a bunch of different numbers, because this is how they named their children. And then you have Seleucid and Antiochus. Okay, so these guys go back and forth. It's still the Seleucid Empire, but they kind of go back and forth. So you're going to get a lot of repeat names with numbers. I'm sorry, there's not really any other way to do it. That's just kind of how they did it. So I try to include their gamer tag, right? Which is like Soter or Theos or Philadelphus or whatever. I try to include that with it, but their main names are it's just the way it is. So here we are 40 years later. So we're in the Ptolemy number 2 now, is 285 to 246 BC. But in the meantime, we've actually gone through 2 kings in the northern kingdom. So after Seleucid I, you end up with Antiochus I. And then when this is happening, we're in Antiochus II. So then it says the south, right? So this is Ptolemy, will send his daughter to the north. So Ptolemy II, right? He actually sends his daughter Bernice, or Berenice, depending on how you want to pronounce it. He sends them to Antiochus II, right? Now, this happens a lot in history. You'll see this all the time. People sending daughters and trying to get marriages to sort of make kingdoms be in alliance. Well, Antiochus is already married. Okay, so he actually divorces his current wife named Laodicea. Okay, or Laodice, sorry, and disowns those children who would have been the next in line to marry Bernice from the southern kingdom, right? Because if you have a marriage that's royal, it's more powerful. Okay, this is actually like a soap opera, right? It's just crazy how all this kind of stuff happens, right? But then it says in the verse, so when I have these numbers, that's the verse that we're referencing or the prophecy that we're referencing, and then the subpoints are how this is fulfilled. So, but it says, right, but she shall not retain the strength, right, and he and his arm shall not endure. Well, guess what? So Antiochus actually divorces Bernice as soon as Ptolemy II dies. So Ptolemy II sends his daughter, right, marries this guy, Antiochus II, and that's it. Oh yeah, we're gonna be married. We're gonna have an alliance. We're gonna be so powerful. And then Ptolemy II dies, and now the daughter has no worth to Antiochus. So he divorces her, and he goes back to Laodicea. Okay, this is crazy. So she shall not retain the strength. She loses the kingdom because he divorces her. All right, and then he and his arm shall not endure. So guess what happens? She shall be given up, he who fathered her. And so this is right after he's dead. So Ptolemy II dies, he's dead. And he who supported her, this is Antiochus. So Antiochus goes back to Laodicea, but then Laodicea poisons Antiochus because she's pissed off that she got divorced for this girl, right? Then after Antiochus gets back with her, Laodicea also kills Berenice. So he has children with Berenice, who's going to be the next king. And they are killed. So he who fathered her and he who supported her in those times. So all of these people lose their power. Then Laodicea puts her kid on the throne instead. Okay? And so all of this, I mean, just the details, right? Just this is going to happen, 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 and boom, 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 boom. I mean, it's like he wrote the play before it happened, right? It's like somebody was following his script. It's incredible. So then we go into Daniel 11, verses 7 and 8. Somebody read that for me?
I got it.
Perfect.
And from a branch from her roots one shall arise in his place. He shall come against the army and enter the fortress of the king of the north, and he shall deal with them and shall prevail. He shall also carry off to Egypt their gods with their mental images and their precious vessels of silver and gold. And for some years he shall refrain from attacking the king of the north.
Yeah. And guys, if you guys have the mic, you can hold it like way down here. It's actually super sensitive. So, but here we go. So from a branch of her roots, he shall come against the north, enter a fortress and deal with them. So her brother, right? So this is from a branch of her roots, right? Who are her roots? Her dad, right? So a branch, it's her brother. Her brother, Ptolemy III, again, sorry, this is how it works, who reigns in 246 to 221, he's upset, right? So they send Berenice, she gets killed, she loses this power, she's slighted, right? And so her brother's like, no, ain't nobody treating my sister like that, right? And he comes to take revenge. right? And so he gets a hold, he actually does, he actually takes quite a few cities and stuff and takes a lot of Syria, and he actually gets a hold of Laodicea, the original wife, and kills her and her new husband, right? This is like, again, like I said, this is a soap opera that's going on, okay? So then he will take their gods in gold and silver. He shall refrain for some years from attacking. So Ptolemy III plunders, right? So he comes in, he wipes out the people that he's supposed to wipe out, and he plunders like all their stuff. This is just pretty common thing that happen, right? You take over the land, you get the gold, the women, and whatever you want, right? So they take it back with him, and then he doesn't attack again. So it says he shall refrain from some years for attacking. Yeah, in fact, he doesn't attack the rest of his life. And it's not until another thing that happens, right? So letting him alone until the next king of the south, which is Ptolemy the fourth, all right, which is also known as Ptolemy the Philopator, which is important, attacks. Okay, so this is much later. So you can see Ptolemy 246 to 221, and then Ptolemy the fourth 221 to 204. So as you can see, we're now almost 350 years after Daniel's writing this, right? I mean, and I don't know how you can possibly write the script so accurately that far in advance. It's just, it has to be God, right? So here we go. Let's go into Daniel 11, 9, and 10. Somebody read that for me.
Then the latter shall come into the realm of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. His sons shall wage war and assemble a multitude of great forces, which shall keep cornering and overflow and pass through, and again shall carry the war as far as his fortress.
Awesome. So then the latter, so who is this? This is the king of the north, right? Shall come into the king of the south, right? It has to be. So here we go. So then the latter, the king of the north now, shall come into the realm of the king of the south, but shall return. So now Seleucid the second, this is the guy that is now in charge, right? He wants a revenge, right? So you get this guy goes up for revenge, then this guy's mad that this guy came for revenge, and so he's after his revenge, whatever it is, right? Whatever the term is, that's what they're for. So he attacks in 240 BC, and he failed, and he's actually sent home. So it says, he shall come into the king of the south, but shall return, right? And then his sons, okay, so this is, his sons shall wage war and assemble a multitude of great forces, and then carry the war as far as his, and this is the king of the south, fortress. So this is what happens. So Seleucid the third, who's one of the sons, tries to fight. He actually gets murdered. So he only, he doesn't last very long. And then another son, right? So you have the first son, Seleucid the third, and then you have a second, right? It says sons with an S, not son, sons. Again, just crazy little details that are important. So now we have Antiochus III, which also he's known as Antiochus the Great, because he's one of the first people to successfully invade Egypt. Okay, now, when people say the great, obviously it's not how we would define great nowadays, but we're talking about, militarily, king-wise, that kind of thing. They expanded their kingdom and they did these great things, right? So here we have exactly that. Seleucid III, he dies, Antiochus III, huge army, and they actually take over. So Antiochus III, who's also known as Antiochus the Great, comes in and basically almost entirely takes over Egypt, right? So, all right, Daniel 11 and 12. Can somebody read that for me? Where's the mic? All right, cool.
And the king of the south shall be moved with choler, and shall come forth the fight with him, even with the king of the north, and he shall be set forth a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into his hand. 12 as well, or no?
Yeah, 12, yeah.
And when he hath taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up, and he shall cast down many 10,000s, but he shall not be strengthened by it.
Yeah. So then the king of the south, right? So the king of the south should be moved with rage. So again, this is what happens when kings are in power, right? Revenge, re-revenge, re-revenge, however many revenges, back and forth, right? This is when people who are in power get upset or embarrassed, they tend to react, right? And they tend to create wars. And this is the history of our world, right? So king of the south should be moved with rage, shall come out and fight. So this is Ptolemy the fourth. This is Philopator, you might remember, right? I said this guy's name before, right? Because there was this it says the king of the south was not going to attack the king of the north for some years. Here we go, some years. New king, he's upset that they've attacked him, so he goes into attacks. He attacks in 240 BC, and he fails, right? He's sent home, and then he, the king of the north, this is Antiochus III the Great, shall raise a great multitude, but it shall be given into his, and this is the Ptolemy the Fourth, hands. And when the multitude is taken away, his heart shall be exalted, and he shall cast down tens of thousands, but he shall not prevail. Guys, this is an extremely famous battle if you study history. This is called the Battle of Raphia. Okay? So this is the only battle in history where we have Asian elephants and African elephants in the same battle fighting each other. This is also known as the Battle of Elephants. Okay? It's pretty cool, right? So if you guys have seen Lord of the Rings or things like that, obviously those are fake, but that's the idea. These giant elephants are coming in. But here's the thing. Elephants, while they're big creatures, they don't do super well in battle, right? They're great for carrying things. They're not so great in actual battle, right? And so what happens is everybody's going crazy, fighting each other. The elephants freak out and they actually split up, and there's 3 different fights that are happening. And this really goes badly for the king of the north. So Ptolemy had 70,000 infantry. These are, it said, right? It says great multitude. Pretty great multitude to say 70,000 infantry, 5,000 cavalry, and 73 war elephants. Okay? Antiochus had 62, some people will say 68,000 infantry, 6,000 cavalry, and 102 elephants. Okay? So, we're dealing with, almost 200,000 people in some form or fashion on this battlefield. This massive, massive battle, right? And then it breaks up, and Antiochus gets whooped. Whooped, okay? So he gets his butt kicked, and he gets sent home, tail between his legs, okay? And so even though hundreds and hundreds of people, thousands of people die in this battle, right? It says, he shall cast down tens of thousands. So Antiochus actually loses about 85 to 90% of his army in this scenario. So it was an extremely bloody battle. Thousands and thousands of guys, elephants, people, cavalry, everybody on both sides gets wiped out, okay? And so Antiochus gets destroyed, and he goes back home with his tail between his legs. So this is a really cool battle if you ever want to study a really interesting battle. Again, it's the only one in history where we have Asian elephants and African elephants fighting each other. So pretty cool. Yeah. So here we go. Daniel 11, 13, and 14. Can you read that for me, somebody?
Oh.
All right, perfect. Let's pass that over there.
Thank you. For the king of the north shall again raise a multitude greater than the first, and after some years he shall come on with a great army and in abundant supplies. In those times many shall rise against the king of the south, and the violent among your own people shall lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they shall fail.
All right. So what is it saying? It's saying he's going to come back with a vengeance. So let's talk about that. So the king of the north will raise a larger army and come again. So that's exactly what he does. Antiochus III, the Great, right, raises another army and attacks 14 years later. Okay? So he brings an army of 70,000 this time. And I said more than the 68, and that's because I went with the larger estimation of the first one, right? So some people say 62,000, some people say 68,000. Regardless, it's still less than the 70,000 he comes with this time. So no matter how you slice it, no matter how you read history from these historians, he's still accurately, historically proving this prophecy. So he brings an army of 70,000 this time, right? Now it says, in those times, many shall rise against the king of the south, and the violent among your own people shall lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision. So this is crazy, but the Israelites actually join with Antiochus III. This is told to us by Josephus, okay? So we have Israelites that are actually coming in, and they're saying, hey, we're going to join Antiochus because they're under the rule of Ptolemy, right? They're under that Egyptian rule. And so they're sort of rebelling, and they're siding with the guy that's coming in to hopefully free them. This is a huge mistake on their part, because we'll find out here why in a little bit. But then, again, Antiochus the Great, he also makes an agreement with Philip of Macedonia, right? So this is from the Greek area, right? He also comes in, and then people that are living in Egypt are also wanting to rebel because Ptolemy is not a good guy, okay? And so they all three combine. So it says, in those times, many shall rise against the king of the south. 3 different groups joining with Antiochus. And the violent among your own people. Who's your own people in this case? Right? This is Daniel writing it, so it's the Israelites, right? And they join too. Right? Again, the details. It's all about the details. Okay? So, Daniel 11, 15 and 16. Can I get you to read that? Do you have the mic? Yeah, I'm going to have him read it. Oh, you read this one, and then we'll pass it to him on the next one. Deal?
Sure. Then the king of the north will come and build up surge ramps and will capture a fortified city. Fortified city. Oh, sorry.
Keep reading all the way to the end of 16.
But he who comes.
And so you're right here.
Oh, and the forces of the south shall not stand, or even his beat troops for their
best troops.
For there shall be no strength to stand. But he who comes against him shall do as he wills, and none shall stand before him. And he shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his hand.
Yeah. Good job, guys. Awesome. Thank you. So the king of the north raises a siege mound and takes a fortified city, right? So Antiochus III again, right? And this is what's called the Battle of Panium, okay? This is important because Panium is right. Does anyone who's familiar with the geography of the area know where the Jordan River is? Yeah. If you do, just raise your hand. Okay. So this is at the heads of the Jordan River, which is right next to
Dead Sea.
Well, it leads into the Dead Sea. But what's the country? Syria, and on the other side? Israel. Yeah. So this is right in Israel. So he basically meets up with the king of the south's general named Scopas, okay? And you see, at this time, Ptolemy IV, right? So now Ptolemy III is a bad king. He gets killed. His son, who's like 8 years old at this time, takes over, right? It was one of those child king situations, right? So he's obviously not on the battlefield, so he sends his general, Scopas, and Scopas sees Antiochus coming and runs. And he runs to the city of Sidon. Okay, so Scopas runs to hide in Sidon. Okay, you might know the name Sidon from Tyre and Sidon, right? These names are so often said together. We already talked about Tyre in a different class that we had, but Sidon is in Phoenicia, which is basically just north of Israel, right? So this is all part of this Israel land. This is affecting the Jews. This is why this is important. So then it says, or even his best troops, for there shall be no strength to stand. So Scopas runs and he hides in Sidon. Antiochus the Great builds a siege mound around Sidon, and even the best troops, so Ptolemy, the kid, sends Europus, Menecles, and Damaxenus, 3 different attempts to come and free Scopas from Sidon, and they fail. And then Scopas actually has to surrender because the siege. So, and he shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his hand. So he's now taken over Israel. So this is Antiochus III now controls Israel right after this battle. Okay. So, I mean, again, guys, it's just, these choice troops. Well, we look at history. Well, what does it mean by choice troops? Europus, Menecles, and Damaxenus. They come and they try as a choice group of guys to come in to free him, and they fail. It's just, I don't know. I love this stuff. And some people don't. I know for some of you guys, this may seem boring, but again, we are establishing the truth of God's word. We have 550 BC. Now we're dealing with stuff, right, in about 215 BC. So how many years later are we dealing with it? About 350 years later, guys. And we talked about it last time. This is why, you see, Daniel is one of the most attacked books in the Bible. Right? We talked about this in the previous class with that you guys were actually here for. That was the Daniel defense class, right? Why? Because with this amount of details, people refuse to believe that it was written by men. Like, men don't know this, right? It can only come from God. And I mean, like, that's exactly the argument, right? Like, that's what we're saying. Yes, it does. It comes from God. But they would say, well, no. He had to write it after the fact. It's too detailed, right? We already proved that he didn't, right? That's why before I got into this really, really detailed one, I wanted to prove to you guys when this was written, when Daniel was written, right? We've already established that argument, okay? So we've dismissed it historically, evidentially, right? You guys remember the cylinders and all that kind of stuff for those who were here. And I know this is your first class with me, but at the very beginning or at the end again, I will put up, there's a YouTube video. And so when you have chance in the Learning Center with computers, when you get to that point, if you're interested, you can watch all of those classes. And it tells, you'll be able to catch up anything that maybe doesn't make sense. But so, all right, Daniel, chapter 11, verse 17. Can you read that for me, Mitch?
Yes. He shall set his face to come with the strength of his whole kingdom, and he shall bring terms of an agreement and perform them. He shall give him the daughter of women to destroy the kingdom, but it shall not stand or be to his advantage.
Yeah. All right. So sometimes we get all these he's and south and north, and this is why we're doing this. So we can break it down. We can see what does that mean. So Daniel 11:17, he shall set his face to come with the strength of his whole kingdom and bring an agreement. So this is after he takes Scopus, right, in Sidon. He then turns his army down, and he's going to take on Ptolemy, the rest of Egypt. But they come to an agreement, and there's an alliance, right? And as with most alliances, that involves women, right? Back then, anyway. So here we go. He shall give him the daughter of women to destroy the kingdom, but it won't be to his advantage. So Antiochus gives his daughter, who you might have heard of, Cleopatra, right? Gives his daughter Cleopatra to Ptolemy IV. He's 8 years old, okay? So his daughter, who's a teenager basically at this time, is going to go marry this 8-year-old kid. Now, it sounds weird to us now, I understand, right? But that's what happened back then. But here's the deal. If you have an older woman, you got that control, you know what I'm saying? You got that controller going on, right? At least that's his thought. I'm going to send my woman, my daughter, to be his woman to control Ptolemy VIII, right? But here's the problem. She actually falls in love with this guy. So as he gets older and he turns into a teen, he turns out to be a pretty good guy. At least she thinks so. And so it won't be to his advantage because Cleopatra chooses her actual husband instead of, so this is Ptolemy, and she chooses Ptolemy over her dad, Antiochus. It's just, it backfires, right? It doesn't work. It won't be to his advantage. Details. I'm going to say it like 1,000 times because it's just so cool how you can just see all of this stuff exactly as it was told. So you can grab that, Mike, and somebody can read 18 and 19 for me, please.
Afterward he shall turn his face to the coastlands and shall capture many of them, but a commander shall put an end to his insolence. Indeed, he shall turn his insolence back upon him. Then he shall turn his face back toward the fortress of his own land, and he shall stumble and fall and shall not be found.
All right, so this is super cool. Like it actually, in my opinion, it just keeps getting cooler and cooler. Right, so the first parts is pretty quick stuff, but then as we kind of go through, we get some really, really cool stuff. So this is one of them. So afterward, he shall turn his face to the coastlands. So is he in Israel? Where is he facing? Where's the coastlands?
On the coast, the Mediterranean.
The Mediterranean, yeah. So he's going to be dealing with like Cyprus and Greece and even
Macedonia.
Well, Macedonia is part of Greece, right? And then even further, what do we have further west from Greece? Italy, which is the West Coast. Who's in Italy?
Rome.
Rome is in Italy. You see, what is it? Does anyone know what the term insolence means?
It means like to defy insolence.
It's more than that, right? It's like it's like this. Think about if you were to talk to somebody who knew so much more and was so much better at this thing, and you were trying to tell them how to do their job, right? It's this idea like, oh, I'm better than you. It's partially an arrogance thing, but it comes from this blown up sense of arrogance that's not realistic, right? So there's arrogance that's backed up, right? Which is more confidence, really, right? And then you have arrogance, which is just, I believe I'm the best, right? So that's what the word insolence kind of means here. This is important because what we're about to find out in this fulfillment is exactly that. Insolence punished. So afterward, so this is Antiochus the Great, so he's already made an alliance with Ptolemy in Egypt, so he doesn't have to worry about his southern borders. He says now he's going to turn his face to the coastlands and shall capture many of them. But a commander shall put an end to his insolence. Indeed, he shall turn his insolence back upon him. So this is cool. So he goes and he takes Cyprus, he takes a lot of Macedonia, he goes into Italy, and he actually takes several of the cities in Italy, right? And he tries to take on Rome, but he fails. You see, Rome is starting to become a world power, and he just doesn't know it yet, right? This is the first time he runs into Rome. In fact, at the Battle of Magnesia, which took place in either December 190 or January 189 BC. So how many years later are we dealing with now?
500. 370.
Yeah, 370, 380, almost 400 years later, right? So Antiochus is stopped by a guy named Lucius Cornelius Scipio Asiaticus.
I love that name.
Try saying that 10 times fast. Right? Like, I wonder what he got called when he was in trouble. Right? You know how your parents always say your full name when you're in trouble? Could you imagine his parents? Lucius Cornelius Scipio Asiaticus. Yeah, see, I can't even do it. You couldn't get in trouble. He would just laugh at them for butchering his name. Right? No. So that's I don't know. I just wanted to lighten it up a little bit. Yeah, well, so again, we're dealing with Romans, right? So this is a lot of Latin. And so they would take, this is actually not super uncommon still in this world. You'll have, specifically, like in the Latino cultures, for example, you actually have two last names, right? And so you get the name of your parents' father and parents' mother, and they add it together. So you'll get some really long names, right? Now, interestingly enough, a lot of the Latino culture doesn't even have middle names at all. You just have a first name and then two last names. It's kind of interesting. But this is kind of what's going on here is they would give them a name and then they would give them multiple other names based on ancestors. So fathers and grandfathers and great grandfathers and that kind of stuff. So Rome, this is so great. Insolence, right? So Rome beats him. Then they say, you know what? You're going to pay for the war. You're going to pay for the damage that you did. Right? So they give him a 15,000 talent debt that he has to pay over 12 years. Now, a talent is a measurement of weight. Okay? That's about 71 pounds of gold per talent.
What?
Per talent. 71 pounds of gold. This is a lot of money. In the Bible, so there's actually 3 different measurements of talent. The Jewish measurement of talent is a worker's wages for 20 years.
Wow.
We're not talking a small sum of money, guys. Like they literally laid the smackdown. You've got to pay 15,000. Now, it was actually broken up. It was like, you got to pay some now, then you got to pay some like right after you leave, and then you have 1,000 talents over the next 12 years. So basically, he had to pay 3,000 talents relatively quickly, and then over the next 12 years, it was 1,000 talents for every year. That was the
He's a
thing.
pretty rich guy then.
No, that's the problem. He had to find a way to get this money. So his son, so this is important. You guys might remember this. His son ends up as a prisoner in Rome. Right? You may have remembered me mentioning somebody ending up in a prisoner in Rome. That's this guy's son. So he goes, he fights against Rome. Rome smacks him down. You're going to pay us back. Not only are you going to pay us back, but in order to make sure you pay us back, we're keeping your son. Okay? This is cool. So then it says, he shall turn his face back toward the fortress of his own land, but he shall stumble. And he shall not be found, is what it says. But we didn't, So he tries to collect the money to pay the money that he owes. Right? But where does he get it? He has to do it. He has to collect it from his own people. This guy is so smart, okay? And I say that sarcastically. He was killed while pillaging a temple of Bel at Elymas, Persia, in 187. So he's on his way home, and he's like, where are we going to get this money? I know where there's a lot of gold. Temples. So, ding, right? Exactly. So he takes his troops in the middle of the night, and he goes and he starts taking the gold from this temple of Bel, okay? And the people of the city go, what? And they kill him and his troops.
Well, yeah.
Because they're all mad, right? So this king dies, right, for his insolence, because he has the insolence to go against Rome and the insolence to go against his own people. Again, details, details, details. It's really cool stuff, right? So he gets wiped out. All right, so, and this is Antiochus the Great. Remember, this is Antiochus the Third. Who's Antiochus the Fourth?
The nasty one.
The nasty one. But where is Antiochus the Fourth right now?
Locked up.
In prison.
Then he changed.
Yeah, we're gonna get to that. Yeah. So, all right, let's read chapter 20 and verse 21. Anybody got? Who's got the thing?
You got it, bro.
Oh,
You got it.
Sorry. Then shall arise in his place one shall send an
Exactor.
of
Tribute.
tribute for the glory of the kingdom, but within a few days he shall be broken, neither in anger nor in battle. In his place shall arise a contemptible person to whom royal majesty has not been given. He shall come and without warning obtain the kingdom by flatteries.
Yeah, so. All right, we're going to move pretty quickly, guys, because we only got about 15 minutes. So I apologize. Again, though, this will all be online, so you can review. So, one who shall send an exactor of tribute for the glory of the kingdom. So his son, who is Seleucus IV, remember this is Antiochus III, he got killed by trying to take out the temple, right? Taking the money from the temple. He gets killed. His son, Seleucus IV, also known as Seleucus the Philopator. They like to use that name, right? They use these names that mean things. Like, so Philopator means like the thinker, the genius kind of, okay? So Antiochus' son, he had to get the money to pay the Romans, right? So he has a debt of 1,000 talents a year that he's got to deal. So all he did in his entire reign for 12 years is tax people. It's literally all he does. He just taxes and taxes and taxes to get his 1,000 talents every year. So then it says, but within a few days he shall be broken, neither in anger nor in battle. So his days, so in other places in Daniel, the term days actually means years, right? So it's not like literally only a few days, okay? What it means is in comparison, right? So in this case, he only ruled 12 years, and he literally didn't do anything. He was kind of a nobody, right? His father, the Great, right, Antiochus the Great, reigned for 37. Right, so in comparison, it was a few days. Okay, so there's a lot more to that. I don't have time to get into, but Daniel also uses the word days as years other places in the book, so it's not just made up. Okay, so the person he sent to plunder the temple in Jerusalem, Heliodorus, actually kills him. So he hires this guy, right, because he's trying to tax, he's trying to get money. He hires this guy named Heliodorus to go to the temple in Jerusalem and take all their gold. This fails. Heliodorus fails. It's actually a really cool story. If you want to read the book of Maccabees, it's actually in there. I don't think Maccabees isn't scripture, but it is historical. It's very interesting stuff. So if you want to know more about that, you can read it. And it seems like there was some supernatural interference at the time. So probably because there was a prophecy about what was going to happen, and it wasn't the time. So it was pretty cool. He failed, and if he had actually succeeded, it would have messed up the prophecy. But he failed. So then he goes back and he gets all mad and he kills Seleucus IV to make the next king, who he thought was probably going to be Heliodorus, right? You assassinate the king because you want to be king. But the problem is, in his place shall arise a contemptible person. Ooh, we talked about this guy before, right? Antiochus IV. To whom royal majesty has not been given. So again, he wasn't supposed to be the king. He shall come in without warning and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. So this is Antiochus IV, Epiphanes, 175 to 163. So we're almost 400 years later now. Remember, we talked about this guy, right? He was the one in Rome. Then he traded his place, right? He got his brother's son, to come and visit him. and then that guy ends up in prison, and he gets out, right? He goes back, right? And he actually does deal making right after Heliodorus kills his brother, Seleucid IV. He actually comes to power instead of Heliodorus, right? So he comes in without warning and obtains the kingdom by flatteries. Exactly how it said. So let's look at 22 and 23 quickly. Who's got the... I'll just read it. Armies shall be utterly swept away before him and broken, even the prince of the covenant. And from that time that an alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, and he shall become strong with a small people. Okay, so let's deal with that. So armies shall be utterly swept away, even the prince of the covenant. So Antiochus IV, this is Antiochus IV Epiphanes, sweeps away his rivals, right? So there's a lot of people, Heliodorus kills him, and then there's several different armies that are trying to like put their guy in power. But he wipes them all out. And then this is the prince of the covenant, right? Even the prince of the covenant. So remember, this is the guy that sold the high priesthood. The prince of the covenant, we think this is going to be a reference to the high priesthood, right? You have the covenant, the people of the covenant, that's Israel. Well, who's the prince of the covenant? It's going to be the sort of like the reigning power, right? So that's going to be the high priest in their case. So, right? Then he acts deceitfully in alliance, right? So he makes all these alliances, like for example, he makes an alliance with the guy that he sells the high priesthood to, and then another guy comes in and offers him more money, and he sells it again. Because this guy doesn't care. Like, he's got no morals. This guy is so bad. Like, one of the things he does is he'll dress up as a commoner, go outside, and then throw rocks at people for fun. Like, this is a thing that he actually does. There's a lot of other things that we can't talk about that he does, right? I have no desire to talk about it. It makes me sick. But this is one of the things that he would do. He would just dress up as a commoner, go outside, and just throw rocks at people. That's how messed up this guy was, right? And they knew who he was, right? So they can't do anything about it. But it's just messed up. So then how he gets into power, he basically says, oh, I'm going to be co-regent with my nephew, right? The son of my brother, right? Who died. This is an infant, right? So like 1 year old, basically. He's like, I'm going to help him rule, right? He makes an alliance. Then he kills the child, to become full king. Okay, this is how messed up this guy is. So he acts deceitfully in alliance. He shall become strong with a small amount of people. So he's supported by basically 2 people when he comes back from Rome. Supported by Eumenaeus and Attalus. And then he gets put in power from a small group of people. So that's how that's fulfilled. Like, it's not like everybody knows who this guy is because he's been in Rome, right? He comes back. He's got a couple of friends. It's like we deal with politics nowadays, right? That vocal minority type thing. It's that same exact thing. Okay, so let's move. Daniel chapter 11. I'm probably just going to read the rest of it just to speed it up because we have about 10 minutes to get through 10 verses. Without warning, he shall come into the richest parts of the province, and he shall do what neither his fathers nor his fathers' fathers have done, scattering among them plunder, spoil, and goods. He shall devise plans against strongholds, but only for a time. See, this is important. The Jews needed to know this guy wasn't going to reign forever because this guy hates Jews, and we'll find that out. So he shall come into the richest parts of the province, and he shall do what neither his fathers nor his fathers' fathers have done. So he actually robbed the rich and gave it to the poor. This guy's a little bit like... That's right, Robin Hood. So basically, he learns this in Rome. Take some money from the rich, give it to the poor people, right? And then the poor people will love you. Rome has influenced politics for the rest of history. Think about it, right? That's what we do. Give money to the poor people or the masses, they're going to vote for you. Anytime you can get free money, right? So he gave, and then he gave his troops plunder. Right? So this is something that Rome did. So he's in Rome. He learns how the Romans do it, right? When in Rome, right? So he learns. And he basically, before this was not a thing. The troops didn't get the money. The king got the money. All of it. All the plunder belonged to the king. But now he says, you know what? We're going to split this money up. You guys get this money. You get the plunder. You get the land. You get the ladies. You know what I'm saying? Right? So... because he's like, I'm not going to be one that's being killed by my troops, because this happened all the time. Kings would be killed by their troops because they were like, you get all this money, we don't get anything? Right? They'd be mad. He's like, that's not going to happen. So he shall devise plans against strongholds, but only for a time. So he's wiping out cities, but only for a time. And I already mentioned why that's important. So, and he shall stir up his power and his heart against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall wage war with an exceedingly great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for plots shall be devised against him. Even those who eat his food shall break him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. So he shall stir up his power. In 170 BC, Antiochus IV, Antiochus Epiphanes, attacks Egypt, and he takes basically all of it. There's a few cities that survive, but basically all of it. So then the south, Ptolemy VI, 181 to 145, right, shall wage war with an exceedingly great and mighty army, but he will not stand, plots from people eating his own food. So Ptolemy was very young, right? This is the guy that we've been talking about, right, that married Cleopatra and was very young, right? So super young guy. Very young, and his counselors failed him. So basically, Antiochus is coming in. He's going to surround Alexandria, and so they think they're going to lose Alexandria. And so turns out, though, Antiochus never actually takes Alexandria, but what did the people tell him, his counselors? Hey, get the king out of here. Send him away. And what happens? Antiochus actually predicts it. Probably this was on purpose, we think. But basically, he captures the ship as he's leaving. So he never captures the city, but he captures the king. Right? So, and as for the two kings, their hearts shall be bent on doing evil. So there's a king of the north, king of the south, shall speak lies at the same table, but to no avail, for the end is yet to be at the appointed time. And he shall return to his land with great wealth, but his heart shall be set against the holy covenant. This is Israel, and he shall work his will and return to his own land. So there's two kings. This is Antiochus IV and Ptolemy VI. They shall speak lies at the same table. They have a meeting at Memphis, right, because he's already captured him. He's captured Ptolemy. And Antiochus leaves Ptolemy to rule over Egypt as a puppet. But as soon as he leaves, Ptolemy goes and joins with his brother to reunite his kingdom. So it fails, right? They're making these deals, and they're speaking lies to each other at the same table. They actually sit down at the table, they eat food, and they make this plan, and then it all falls apart. So his heart shall be set against the holy covenant. So on his way back, he's a little upset that he didn't get to take Alexandria, and he kills 80,000 Jews. And then another 80,000 end up as slaves or prisoners. Right? This guy hates the Jews. Right? And he even, at this time, he strips all the gold off the wall in the temple. Right? He is super against these guys. Okay. This is cool, guys. Pay attention to this part if you don't pay attention to anything else, because this is really cool. At the time appointed, he shall return and come into the south, but it shall not be this time as it was before. So before, he captures almost everything except for Alexandria. For ships of Kittim shall come against him, and he shall be afraid and withdraw, and shall turn back and be enraged and take action against the holy covenant. He shall turn back and pay attention to those who forsake the holy covenant. So this is cool. So he's going back into Egypt, right? Because they're sort of repopulating there. He actually had a group of soldiers there to sort of watch things. They kick out his group of soldiers. They send them back. They're like, we don't need you anymore. We're strong enough to handle our business. So he gets an army. He comes in. He takes through Cyprus. He goes to the Mediterranean Sea, and he comes down. But guess what? Antiochus IV goes against Egypt again after losing his puppet king. And on his way, he runs into
The mean one.
Rome. He is the mean one. So Rome has sent ships to stop him from becoming powerful. This is in 168 BC. You see, Gaius Popilius Laenas, look another name, right? This is cool. So basically, he fights this battle. He loses this battle. This guy, one guy, talks to the king and he says, if you continue this fight, you and I, Rome and you are going to be at war. Now, he already knows what Rome's like. He was in Rome before. He knows how his dad lost. He knows Rome is a superpower. So he's like, well, let me go talk to my counselors, right? And the guy goes, and he draws a line around him, a circle around Antiochus IV. And he says, before you step foot out of this circle, you have to give me your answer. This is the phrase, draw the line in the sand. This is where we get that phrase. Pretty cool, right? He literally draws a circle and he says, nope, you got to make your answer before you leave this circle. And so now, of course, he doesn't want to fight with Rome. He doesn't get to talk to his people, so he says, fine. And he starts to head home. He is super, super embarrassed. and upset, right? So he shall be turned back. So he's embarrassed by Rome and he's angry at who's there on his way home? The Jews, right? So he's in Egypt. He's headed back home. Who's right in the way? Israel, the Jews. Forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offering, and they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. This is also known as the abomination of desolation, okay, which is a pretty big term in biblical prophecy.
It's a revelation too, right?
It is. Mm-hmm.
It's the same one they're talking about?
It's the same kind of thing, yeah. So he shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant, but the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. So he profanes the temple and the fortress, right? So Antiochus IV comes back and he does terrible, terrible things. He kills parents. So if you get circumcised, he kills you and your parents. He sacrifices to Zeus in the temple. He sacrifices pigs in the temple. And he refuses to allow Jews to make burnt sacrifices. So it says he'll take away the burnt offering. He shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant, but his people know their God. So he actually told the priesthood to sacrifice pigs. Some of them refused, right? He says, refuse to sacrifice to Zeus. He says no, so he kills them. That guy that he kills is the father of Judas Maccabee. And this starts the Maccabean rebellion, where we get Hanukkah, right? So that's where this is all coming from. Okay? All right, guys, this is the last one, so bear with me, okay? And so, and the wise among the people shall make many understand, though for some days they shall stumble by sword and flame, by captivity and plunder. When they shall stumble, they shall receive a little help, and many shall join themselves to them with flattery. And some of the wise shall stumble, so that there may be refined, purified, and made white, until the time of the end, for it still awaits the appointed time. Kind of get this sense that pause, right? Here's everything, now let's wait. So they stumble, they shall receive a little help, and many shall join themselves to them with flattery. So again, during the Maccabean rebellion, so this is the Jews rebelling against Antiochus IV, they actually succeed, and they get a lot of Jews, but here's the thing, a lot of those guys that join the Maccabean rebellion turn it into like a powership thing, like they turn it into a small kingdom. They joined to get power, not to do the right thing, just as it says, join them with flattery. Some join only to get power. Now, until the time of the end, for it still awaits the appointed time. So I told you, we're only going to 35, so 36 through the end of the chapter, I think are future prophecy, right? So we kind of get this like pause. You get this sense of like, and now, right? And then if you want to read the rest of the chapter, feel free to do so. Most people would think that it's about the end times, like when the Antichrist comes, okay? So in conclusion, we're going to deal with these three things and we're going to say a word of prayer and then I'll let you go. I apologize. A couple minutes late here. So we have incredibly detailed prophecy. Over 490 years worth of prophecy in 35 verses, right? And not just prophecy, right? Detailed, specific prophecy. Yet another fingerprint of an amazing God who knows everything that's going to happen before it happens. Guys, what was meant for the Jews is also intended for us. They knew God was in charge. They knew God was going to make these things happen. These were what was going to happen, and they knew we only had to endure. And just like today, we know we only have to endure. One day at a time, right? The next day, just do the next right thing, right? Next time, we'll get into Jesus' prophecy now that we know the word is true. So we've been through a lot of prophecy, and it's not been about Jesus. But next time, for the first time, we're going to get into Jesus' prophecy, which is really cool. And we will not be in Daniel, but we'll go back to Daniel in a couple weeks because there's another prophecy that's really, really cool. So, and it's actually got a specific timeline of when things are going to happen, including when Jesus is going to show up. And it happens exactly as the timeline says. Pretty cool. So, if you guys have a hat and you're willing to remove it, I'll ask you to do so and we'll say a quick word of prayer. Father God, thank you so much for the opportunity again, Lord, to look at your word. Lord, I ask that you be with these guys the rest of their day and just bless them. And hopefully some of this made sense to them, Lord, and gave them a sense of truth and revealed to them how amazing you truly are. Father God, I appreciate their time and, Lord, the time that you've given me to just come and be here. Father, we praise you in the mighty name of Jesus.
Amen.
Amen.
Can you just make sure it turns off?
Wait.